Good morning and welcome to today's meeting of the Maryland Public Service Commission. Before we get started today, I would like to recognize one of our newer employees. Although yesterday we had an employee staff recognition event, which I thought went very nicely. It was always good to see the entire staff get together in one room at one time. The new employee that I'd like to introduce is Doralee Calderon Facunle. Is Doralee here? Hi, Doralee. Doralee joined us back on May 10th as an administrative specialist in our Consumer Affairs Division. She has extensive experience in various aspects of consumer relations and has been a supervisor and manager in the past. She also is a fluent Spanish speaker, so she will be assisting some of our other staff in helping Spanish-speaking citizens across the state. So, Doralee, welcome and bienvenidos. With that, we have a relatively heavy docket this morning, so I will turn it over to the Executive Secretary. The minutes. We have minutes. Minutes, I wasn't at the last meeting, so maybe that's why I don't recall them. We have minutes from the administrative meeting of May 8th. Is there a motion?
I believe also May 1st, is that correct?
We do.
And May 1st?
I would like to move then we approve the minutes from the May 1st administrative meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Now we have minutes from the May 8th meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the minutes from the May 8th administrative meeting.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The minutes are approved. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the consent agenda, we have 3 items. Integrated Energy Services, LLC, filed on April 3, 2019, an application for a license to supply electricity or electric generation services in Maryland. Item 2 is Integrated Energy Services, LLC, filed on April 4, 2019, an application for a license to supply natural gas or natural gas supply services in Maryland. And item 3 is L5E LLC, filed on April 16, 2019, notification of the acquisition of Luthen Associates, Inc.
Thank you. Do commissioners have questions on this item? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. For items number 1 and 2, I move that we grant the company a license to operate as an electricity supplier and as a gas supplier in Maryland, limited to broker services, for the customer classes and service territories applied for and recommended by staff. That we direct the company to provide marketing and training materials specific to its Maryland operations to the Commission staff 30 days prior to utilization of the materials in Maryland, and direct the company to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in the application. And for item number 3, I move that we note the filing.
Thank you, Commissioner Linton. Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
The motions are approved.
Moving to the administrative agenda, item 4 is Trident Retail Energy LLC, DBA Trident Power, filed on April 11, 2019, request to cancel license and return of collateral.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. Michael Dean on behalf of staff. Item 4 is a filing by Trident Retail Energy LLC, doing business as Trident Power, which requests its electricity and gas supplier licenses be canceled. Under COMAR 20.51.03.05A and 20.54.03.05A, a licensed supplier is required to provide 60 days notice of its intention to cease providing services to all customers in the state. The filing requests that the supplier licenses IR 3577 and IR 3579 be canceled. The company does not currently have any customers in Maryland, has no open complaints, and has no unpaid assessments. As noted in staff's comments, the company still has outstanding renewable portfolio standard compliance obligations required by Public Utilities Section 7-705 for electricity suppliers. Based on 1,905 megawatt hours of electricity sales in 2019, this would convert to 351 Tier 1 renewable energy credits and 37 solar renewable energy credits for the payment of an alternative compliance payment. Staff recommends that the commission direct the company to retire the renewable energy credits or make alternative compliance payments to satisfy its 2019 renewable portfolio standard obligation and file a 2019 renewable portfolio standard compliance report with the commission staff prior to the commission canceling its licenses.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Is counsel for Trident present? Mr. Dean, can you represent whether the recommendation has been shared with representatives from Trident?
Kevin Mosier on behalf of the staff. It has, and the company is, they stated that they were planning on filing an RPS report next April, but our concern, of course, is once the license is gone, I think it's an open question as to how we would make them comply.
Right. Have you shared with them the recommendation to either retire the RECs or make the payment?
Yes.
Okay. And have they expressed, can you represent which alternative they will choose?
They were going to retire Rex.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
It was a company that offered a green product, so that was one of the reasons they wanted to make sure and comply.
Thank you, Mr. Mosier. Any other questions? Commissioner O'Donnell?
Yeah, so the recommendation is to have them retire their obligation for the RECs, file a compliance report. But we don't actually make a contingency to cancel. Will this come back before us for a formal cancelization once that compliance is filed, or do we need to modify your recommendation? In other words, there's nothing in your recommendation that says cancel contingent on them filing a compliance report.
I think it may be worthwhile to revise the recommendation so we didn't have to bring it before you a second time.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
So, Mr. Mosier, they don't have to wait until next year to retire these RECs and file the report, do they?
They do not. The statute just says that they have to file it by April 1st.
By April 1st. Do you have a sense as to whether they're going to file it sooner than that, or?
I think they would file it very quickly.
Okay. All right. And you're recommending that we hold up the cancellation of their gas and their electric and their gas license.
Actually, it wouldn't be necessary to hold up the gas license.
Right. So what I think what we want to do is, my recommendation to the commission would be to accept the recommendation or accept the request to cancel its gas license, and also accept it with respect to its electric, contingent upon its filing, satisfying its REC obligation for 2019. Do I have that right?
Well, staff just said they wanted to bring the electricity license cancellation back before us a second.
Oh, I thought he said he didn't.
I'm
I
sorry.
misunderstood that.
I may have misspoken. I meant to say go ahead and cancel it contingent upon filing that. That way we wouldn't have to bring it before you a second time.
Okay, fair enough. I misheard you probably, which is not unusual for these old ears. So, yeah, I would
Okay.
be amenable to that.
Okay.
Thank you. Additional questions? Seeing none, Commissioner Herman, would you like to make the motion?
Yes. I move that with respect to the natural gas supplier license, we grant the request to cancel that license, and with respect to the electricity supplier license, that we grant the request to cancel contingent on Trident satisfying its 2019 renewable portfolio standard obligation, and the filing of a report to demonstrate that it has.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second for the purposes of discussion, do we need the language directing them to make the compliance filing and to retire the alternative payments, or the language that's recommended? Is that part of the motion?
I just said to meet its 2019 renewable obligation, which I thought sort of encompassed all of that.
Includes a compliance filing?
And, right, I believe I also said that it would include a compliance
Okay,
filing.
I just want to make sure I understand the motion, because it seems to be absent a lot of the language that was recommended to us.
So, compliance
Did I-
filing and the report.
Right. Shall I try again?
Could you restate it?
Yes. All right.
New motion.
All right. Cancel that motion. We'll try again. I move that we grant the request to cancel its natural gas supplier license And I also move that we grant the request to cancel the electricity supplier license contingent upon making, retiring RECs or making alternative compliance payments to satisfy its 2019 renewable portfolio standard obligation, and contingent on it filing a 2019 RPS compliance report with staff.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is approved.
Items 5 and 6 can be called together. Item 5 is Lightstar Energy Group, LLC, filed on March 27, 2019, an application for a license to supply electricity or electric generation services in the state of Maryland. And item 6 is Lightstar Energy Group, LLC, filed on April 10, 2019, an application for a license to supply natural gas or natural gas supply services in Maryland.
And do we have Lightstar Energy with us today? Thank you. If you could approach the podium to your right. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Jung.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. Michael Jang on behalf of staff. These items address the request by Lightstar Energy Group for authorization to serve as an electricity and natural gas broker in Maryland. The company serves customers in New York, New Jersey, and Maryland. The company has sufficient experience in the energy industry. The New York Department of Public Service does not regulate brokers, and no complaints have been filed against Lightstar in both New Jersey and Maryland, or Maryland. Lightstar began operation as a broker in Maryland in 2013, even though Lightstar had not requested and had not received commission authorization. Staff considers several factors when recommending a penalty for unauthorized operations by a supplier, such as how long the supplier has operated, and other precedents. Lightstar responded to Commission staff's data requests, and responses are provided in Appendix A in the buck sheet. Based on Lightstar's revenues, the company would owe the Commission approximately $150 in assessments if the company obtained a license in 2013. Staff recommends that Lightstar pay a $1,000 civil penalty for operating as an electric broker without authorization, along with a separate $1,000 civil penalty for operating as a natural gas broker without authorization, for a total of $2,000. The Commission previously imposed a $2,500 penalty in a similar case. Staff recommends that Commission grant the company a license to operate as an electricity and natural gas supplier in Maryland, limited to broker services with conditions recommended by staff. Staff also recommends that Lightstar pay a $1,000 civil penalty for operating as an electric broker without authorization, along with a separate $1,000 civil penalty for operating as a natural gas broker without authorization, for a total of $2,000.
Thank you, Mr. Jang. You mentioned $150 in assessments that have not been paid since the supplier was doing business in the state without permission since January of 2013. Is that $150 assessment for both the electric and the gas, or is it combined or separate?
That is for both electric and gas.
Total.
So that would be if they did obtain a license.
Okay. Thank you. Counsel for Lightstar, do you have any, would you like to address any of the concerns that Mr. Jang just raised, or have any additional information to provide the Commission? And if you could please state your name and title.
Yeah, my name is Moshe Afra, and I am Director of Finance.
Thank you. Do you have anything that you'd like to present to the Commission?
Not at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Do Commissioners have questions? Commissioner O'Donnell.
I'm just curious, how did the company come to operate in the state without the licensing, and how did you become aware that you needed to get a license? I imagine you didn't know.
Yeah, sure. So the company began in the state of New Jersey.
Could you step closer to the microphone, please?
Good. The company began in New Jersey and got licensed in New Jersey to operate as a energy broker, and the individual who was the actual owner of the company was from Maryland. He had moved to New Jersey, and upon opening the company and having sales over there, there was mutual connections in Maryland where, there were childhood friends or connections between him and, the community he grew up in. And that individual, had these sales in Maryland without, it's unknown right now as to why that was the case. This individual actually passed away 3 years ago. Suddenly he just had cancer, and he passed away 3 months after he had that. I was brought on. I mean, subsequent to that, the company was in disarray as this individual was really running the company, and it was a sole proprietorship at that point. So for the following 2 years, the company was sort of stagnant, just trying to get on its feet and figure out what steps to take, following that. I was brought on in late October of 2018 to run the finances of the company, the regulatory aspects of everything, and after looking at everything, I basically found out that we weren't licensed in Maryland, and we did have sales in Maryland, and this is something that we need to get done, and that's how we got to this point.
So you self-identified and you reported to the commission, is that what happened?
Correct.
Okay, that's important to know. To staff, question is regarding the extent of this condition. This supplier was operating in Maryland since 2013, a lot of years without a license. How do we have a sense of how frequent this occurs and how widespread this may be in our state? Because to me, maybe I'm naive, but a little shocking that we had an operator operating for so long without a license. And how do we find out about these things?
Kevin Mosier on behalf of staff. It is pretty rare that this happens now. Back in the 2000s, we probably got one of these, every couple of months. The thing is, about half the states with retail electric competition regulate brokers, half don't. So we would, again, every couple of months, I'd say, get, an electric broker that would, said, oh, we've had, sales in the state for the last couple of years. We thought, like, for instance, New York, that the state didn't regulate brokers.
So we, in this instance, had the company self-identify and self-report, which is appreciated. But we don't have any tools to kind of figure out if there are any others out there right now.
I believe the best way to do this would probably be to contact all the licensed retail electric suppliers that are actually providing, taking title to the electricity, and find out, if they have any brokers that don't have a license. The commission had started an investigation into that a number of years ago.
What were the results?
I don't think the case ever finalized.
Maybe something worth looking into, not in the context of this instance, but generally maybe worth looking at, in my opinion. Thank you.
Commissioner Richard.
Yeah, I just wanted to just again ask the question about the assessments, the past assessments. I note that both buck sheets indicate there's $150 in past assessments. So are we talking about for this company $300?
No, it would just be $150. We just, the company gave us their annual revenue for, combined for each year. So based on the percentages, in total it added up to $150.
Okay, so it is just $150. All right. I was, and so this, I wondered if you could tell me just a little bit about the circumstances, and of course I can't get the page up, but you were talking about a company that was fined $2,500. Do you recall what the circumstances were for that particular company, and were there any other circumstances that were considered in setting that amount?
So that company was Avid Exchange Inc., and it was looked at in an administrative meeting on August 3rd, 2016. This company was also providing electricity and gas broker services in Maryland for, I believe, 5 years before coming to the commission. In staff's buck sheet for that recommendation, staff recommended a fine of about $18,700, and that's based on assessments that would have been owned, 5% of their total revenues throughout the years, and also a civil penalty of $500 for each year that they were operating. And I believe the commission came to a conclusion that a civil penalty of $2,500 was enough for that.
And I think I somewhat remember that, and the revenues were quite a bit higher in that case, right? And I think you indicated about 5%. Is that?
Yes.
So, okay. Well, I was just going to suggest to my fellow commissioners that and I don't know if at that time the company actually appeared either before us, like we have the company today.
I am not sure.
Okay. Suggest, I think that there are extenuating circumstances in this case. Also, there's a self-disclosure. And we're talking about fewer customers and a much lower revenue amount that we're talking about in this circumstance. So perhaps we might entertain a reduction in the 2,000, and perhaps it would be along amount, maybe the order of $150 for past assessments. Again, just to again better reflect the fewer number of customers, the lower revenue overall, and the self-disclosure and circumstances. So I just wanted to put that on the table before a motion is made.
Can I ask a question based on that?
Yes.
What would the assessments have been had the company applied for and received its license prior to beginning operations in Maryland? What would the cumulative amount of assessments have been since 2013?
It would have been around $150
Just a year or
or
just
total.
total?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Do commissioners have additional questions? Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the company, the customers that you currently have in Maryland, I believe it's 8 customers representing 26 accounts. Are those all commercial accounts, or are they commercial, residential? Or
Commercial.
all commercial.
All commercial.
Are those what type of commercial accounts are they? Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, I mean, I know one of them's a larger supermarket.
I'm sorry.
One of them's a larger supermarket,
Oh, largers. Okay.
and that consists of almost half those revenues, or very close to half. The other few, I think, are real estate buildings.
Okay. And those are. Do you know roughly around when they were acquired?
Most of them were in 14, 15, and 16.
14, 15, and 16. So that was during the time the original founder of the company was still engaged.
Correct.
All right, so at the time, since you took over in your position, has the company continued to, have they acquired any of these
No,
8 customers?
we ceased the second we noticed that we needed a license in the state of Maryland, we ceased all sales. I mean, the truth is we were never really actively seeking customers in Maryland up until that point. Most of those were based off of, like I said, connections, friendly relationships that he's made because he was from Baltimore.
Okay, so these accounts that you have currently, they were before you started, but were they acquired after the original founder passed, or were they all acquired through
They were all before.
all before he passed away? Okay.
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, in response to the discussion from Commissioner Richard, and I certainly appreciate and I'm sympathetic to the company self-identifying and some extenuating, maybe mitigating circumstances. The fact of the matter is that we hold our utilities and our suppliers, retail suppliers, to a very high standard of compliance, and we should. If we get lax on that, it sends the wrong signal, I believe, to the community, and so we better be very careful about signaling that this is something you might get away with. So I do believe there has to be a penalty, and I think that penalty is not necessarily out of line at $1,000 because they operated for so many years. I might be open to a small reduction of maybe $150 that would effectively cover the assessment. And I don't know how other commissioners feel, but maybe you could go down to $850, and the assessment being paid would make $1,000. That would be at least be an acknowledgement, but still provide a penalty and some deterrence. But I wouldn't want to do away with the penalty.
For commission staff, if we direct Lightstar to pay the penalty, they don't pay the assessment, or do we collect the $150 assessment?
We would not collect the assessments.
Okay, so the penalty would be in lieu of, for counsel for Lightstar, does the company have any inability to pay the 2 $1,000 fines?
No, we can pay it if it needs to be paid.
Okay, thank you.
Based on that, I retract my offer to reduce.
Just being honest.
looking at some of our past precedent, and along the lines of the fact that we need to ensure that our suppliers do register timely with us, I am comfortable with staff's recommendation. Do commissioners have other viewpoints they'd like to share or not?
I don't have a different viewpoint. I also agree that we do need a deterrent, and I think this is an appropriate amount that's not too excessive, given the fact they were operating in the state for 6 years without a license.
Okay. Thank you. Any additional comments from the bench? Okay. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the commission grant the company a license to operate as an electricity supplier and a gas supplier in Maryland, limited to broker services for the customer classes and service territories applied for and recommended by staff. Direct the company to pay a civil penalty to the commission in the amount of $1,000 for each license granted. Direct the company to provide marketing and training materials specific to its Maryland operations to the commission staff and Office of People's Counsel 30 days prior to utilization of the materials in Maryland, and direct the company to file notice with the commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in the application.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motions are approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next two items can be called together as well. Item 7 is Delmarva Power and Light Company, filed on December 21, 2018. Proposed standard offer service rider to reflect retail transmission rates. And number 8 is Potomac Electric Power Company, filed on December 21, 2018. Proposed standard offer service rider to reflect retail transmission rates.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Benjamin Baker on behalf of staff. Pepco and Delmarva, together known as the PHI companies, filed tariffs to update standard offer service transmission rates for 2018 transmission cost. Pepco transmission rates now include SMECO transmission cost that were deemed part of the bulk electric power system in 2016 by NERC, and the current cost became effective June 1st, 2018. Additionally, both companies included cost related to a FERC-approved PJM transmission settlement for high voltage transmission costs allocation that reallocates transmission revenues collected from 2007 to 2015 and how these costs were to be collected going forward. In the tariff filings, the PHI companies did not include all the costs associated with the FERC settlement because the PHI companies plan to collect or refund these costs in their purchased cost adjustments, or PCAs. Staff does not agree with this approach since it may disadvantage retail suppliers, and using the PCA to recover part of the settlement cost creates cross-subsidization amongst rate classes. Instead, staff believes these costs should be put into transmission rates. Additionally, staff recommends costs associated with the PJM settlement from 2007 to 2015 be allocated using a historic revenue allocator to align with cost causation. The final bill impact for average residential customers under staff's recommendation is an increase of $8.15 per month for Pepco and a decrease of 83 cents per month for DPL. If Pepco's initial filing was accepted without modification, staff anticipates the cost to customers to be approximately $5 to $6 a month, since placing the FERC settlement costs into the PCA would spread these costs over approximately 2 years instead of 1 year. The PHI companies have been collecting the unbilled transmission costs for these charges through their PCAs since August of 2018. Staff is aware the FERC settlement costs being placed into the PCA will end in July, but staff still believes these costs should be removed from the PCA to minimize cross-subsidization amongst ratepayers. The company has agreed to reverse the charge's placement into the PCA to undo any cross-subsidization that has occurred. Therefore, staff recommends the Commission direct the company to revise the tariff pages to incorporate rates as presented by staff with an effective date of June 1st, 2019. Additionally, require the company to reverse the transmission charges placed into the procurement cost adjustment since August of 2018. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker, and we appreciate the very detailed buck sheets. Obviously, there's a long litigated, tortured history here regarding the transmission rates in PJM and the amount of litigation that FERC and the parties have taken their time over the past 10 years, and hence we're presented with a number of filings today. Counsel for Delmarva and Pepco.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Matt Seegers appearing for Pepco and Delmarva. Just one minor correction. The PCA, it stands for the Procurement Cost Adjustment. So other than that, the companies have reviewed staff's buck sheet, and staff's proposal, essentially, it's a different way for the companies to get cost recovery of these transmission charges, but one which we're not opposed to. I know that the Office of People's Counsel has filed comments. OPC seems to prefer the company's original proposal. The companies would find either method reasonable, and we are here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Why don't we hear from Office of People's Counsel at this point? I know that Mr. Fields filed some comments.
Yes, thank you, Chairman and Commission. William Fields for the Office of People's Counsel. We did file comments on this, both of for the Pepco and Delmarva filings, and want to thank the company and the staff for working with us to try to better understand this pretty complicated and long history of this and its impacts on rates at this point. I think we are at a position now of trying to do the least amount of harm. There is not an option here where we kind of avoid the harm. Our position is we agree with we prefer in a least harm sort of way what the company had originally proposed, because that will basically spread out some of this past due payment from customers that goes through the PHI companies, then off to other entities to deal with this FERC settlement. We understand staff's points about some potential temporary impact on the retail supply market and in a somewhat of a mismatch in transmission rates. We understand that. We also understand their point about the cost allocation, although that has a very minimal effect on residential customers. So while we understand their position, like I said, either way there's going to be some harm inflicted. And we think the better balance in this situation is to allow these costs to be recovered over a longer period of time, which is what the company's original proposal of allowing this to flow through the PCA would do. The charges would continue to go into the PCA. When charges go into the PCA, they're collected over a 12-month period. And so they would continue to go into the PCA through July or August of this coming summer, and then they would slowly be reduced through month to month and sort of tail off throughout the next year. And that would accomplish sort of a 2-year payback of this money instead of a year, which would just reduce the monthly impact on customers that they're going to see in their bill.
Mr. Fields, would that effectively cut the $8.15 for Pepco in half?
I think so, but I would certainly not be surprised if someone from the company or staff corrected me on that. But I think that is basically the idea.
Okay. There's some chatter behind you, so perhaps we'll.
Maybe I need to stand corrected.
Commissioners, Joseph Janoka from PHI. As Mr. Baker had noted in his summary, I think there was about a $3 difference in the bill impact between running all of these costs through the transmission rates versus running them through the PCA. And I think part of the issue is that there's two things going on. The PCA portion, we're not talking about running all of the transmission increase through the PCA. It's a kind of a sub-component of the items that we're running through the transmission rates. And so we're not stretching everything out over 2 years, but just a piece of it. So it wouldn't necessarily reduce it directly in half, but it does have the impact of reducing it substantially by about the $3 amount that Mr. Baker pointed to.
Thank you. And point of clarification, did any retail suppliers intervene in this matter?
No. And if you, to understand the full bill impact, you could look at Table 1 on page 4 of my Pepco buck sheet. The last two charges presented on that table are about $5. Those are the two charges that we're right now discussing about their placement in the PCA or not placement in the PCA. So I've assumed about $2.50 of that would be, I'm assuming about half, so instead of $5 in 1 year, it'd be about $2.50 in over 2 years. So
These are lines 6 and 7 on Table 1?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Baker, the buck sheet says that the company is not proposing any carrying charges on this. Is that correct?
I do not believe they are, but I'll let Matt or Joe speak to that.
No carrying charges.
No carrying charges. So there's no extra cost associated with spreading it out over the time period.
That is correct.
Okay. And Mr. Baker, we knew this was coming, right? We knew this was going to happen. And when we approved in August of 2018, we put it in the PCA. And now you're saying let's reverse that and undo that. Is that correct?
We did not, I should say, so we weren't aware of this going into the PCA until December. So this charge was approved by FERC in May. So the settlement was submitted to FERC sometime in 2016. Part of that agreement at FERC was that that costs that were not collected from 2016 until their approval date, they would basically accumulate, and then at the end of that, they would be collected within a year. By PJM. So the company started being billed for that in July, is my understanding. And so at that point in time, the company started placing that into their PCA. Then they filed in December to amend their transmission rates. At that point, we discovered that this had been occurring, and so that's when we approached them about undoing this in the PCA. So the charge was never in front of the commission, to my knowledge. It was, so yeah.
Okay. Mr. Seeger, is that correct?
Yes, it is, Your Honor. That is correct.
Okay. So why did the company think it was appropriate to run it through the PCA beginning in July?
August, I believe.
August.
I'm going to have to bring up Mr. Janoka for that, Your Honor.
Mr. Janoka?
The company, traditionally runs the any lag in our transmission rate changes through the PCA. That's historically always been done. This year, with this particular FERC settlement, that was a kind of a unique circumstance in that these are, 1 year, one time charges, and so, excuse me. We kind of contemplated how best to handle this in terms of balancing out the impact as well as the cost recovery aspect of it. And we, again, made the decision to let the kind of the catch-up payments run through the PCA while adjusting the balance of the transmission rates, which reflect the prospective costs that we would see, and increase the transmission rates that way. I mean, the logic behind that was simply that this was this settlement catch-up was a one-time occurrence. That was, and again, since there were no carrying charges, there was no additional costs that would be where customers would be impacted by stretching this recovery out over a longer period of time.
Okay. And finally, Mr. Baker, the staff's recommendation is based on the theory that this is bad for retail suppliers. Is that correct?
That is one of the two premises that we have, is that retail suppliers who were also getting charged for this starting in July of last year would not have the same mechanism by which to spread the cost over. Now, they might be under different contracts with customers, so it's unclear how they would handle a sudden increase in their transmission rates. But to the extent that, without having understanding of how they would actually operate with a sudden increase, that was one of our premises. The other was the readjustment amongst, was the PCA would spread cost out across ratepayers who would otherwise not pay a transmission cost. So even though I appreciate OPC's point that residential customers might not be impacted. If you were to look at table 6 on page 9 of my buck sheet, you would see that the street lighting classes who would traditionally never pay any cost are now paying transmission costs by putting these costs in the PCA.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baker.
A couple questions for staff. So what customers are we talking about here in these tables in terms of bill impacts?
Sorry, for the residential customers?
For all classes.
So for the residential, so the $8 for the residential customer, that's the average residential customer that we're discussing, which has a usage of around 800 plus kilowatt hours. For the others that I present in tables, where is it? Table 2 on page 7, that is a range of impacts. And that range of impacts is basically the company provides high and low. They provide a range of possible usage patterns for their customers, and so this is representative of basically the worst case and the best case.
So, but help me out. I'm asking a more fundamental
Okay.
question. You got to go slow with me because I want to take this up. Are we talking about the customers in, for instance, the PHI companies only?
Okay, so we're discussing the standard offer service customers who will take standard offer service rates. The retail supply, the charge that PJM is imposing upon both the retail customers and PHI is universal to all customers. So all customers
All
will
customers
receive
where?
in the PHI, in the PEPCO footprint, or
Okay.
in the, yes.
The PEPCO footprint or the
It's
the
called
transmission region?
the
That's what I'm trying to figure out. Are we talking about
Yeah.
service territories of the utility, or are we talking about the transmission region?
We're talking about the transmission region
Okay.
of PEPCO,
Okay. Of PEPCO.
which is
You keep
the
confusing.
PEPCO. Sorry, there's a zone called PEPCO. I'll let the company.
The PEPCO service territory has its own PJM zone, is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
And that includes SMECO here as well.
That's my point. That's what I'm trying to get to. What's the impact on SMECO is really what I'm trying to get to. Can someone answer me on that?
That is covered in another buck sheet that we're going to have in front of us, but
What the decision we make here with regard to PCA or transmission location of these charges? What is the impact, before I make a decision on this, on SMECO one way or another? Maybe SMECO wants
The
to
decision
comment.
you make on the rates that are before you in these two buck sheets, Commissioner, those would not affect SMECO customers one way or the other. SMECO, the PJM transmission rates and the FERC settlement will be transmitted. Costs involved will be transmitted to SMECO customers, but that will be through SMECO's rates in the item that follows these two items.
I understand that, but I'm talking about the distinction between OPC's recommendation and staff's recommendation and how that may impact one way or another SMECO. That's really what I'm trying to get to.
that should not impact SMECO, because what we're talking about between us and OPC is a distinction between how you're going to charge your standard offer service customers.
Okay, Mr. McDougall?
Commissioner O'Donnell, staff is correct in this. SMECO is in the PEPCO zone,
I understand.
but however the commission decides on this issue, given the staff and the OPC's positions, it should not affect SMECO at all, because it is affecting their standard offer service customers, PEPCO standard offer service customers, and SMECO is not a standard offer service customer of PEPCO.
Okay, and the reason I wanted to ask the question is because it seems like OPC is maintaining that there's going to be less of a bill impact. Well, that has to be picked up somewhere because the costs are fixed, right? Where's it picked up? If we go with OPC's recommendation.
It's picked up over more time, so the same costs are collected. So the PHI companies, I'm not sure how they will handle the amount of time. So they'll still have to pay PJM during this time frame. I'm not sure how they are going to how they handle the mismatch between the bill that they're receiving from PJM today versus the length of time they wait to collect the money from their
So the
customers.
transmission costs that are due that result from this all are going to be collected, and it's not going to be reduced regardless of which way we decide on this. Is that right?
That's my understanding.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ascertain and make sure. It wasn't clear to me that that was the case. Thank you.
Don't go far, Mr. McDougall. We'll have you back in a minute. Do commissioners have additional questions on, obviously, that we have two very compelling proposals with pros and cons for each. Commissioner Richard.
Yeah, I think you've already answered these questions, but I just want to be clear for the retail suppliers, and I guess starting with the retail customers. So the retail customer in Pepco does not pay, if I understand correctly, the PCA. Is that correct? So there would not be a double charging.
Yes, PHI.
I don't believe that's correct, Commissioner.
Commissioner, when you say retail customer, you're talking about a customer that has a
If I have
third-party supplier.
if I get my commodity from a retail supplier,
Correct.
okay, do I pay the PCA?
You do not.
I do not. Okay. And then the other question I had, have you talked to, or did you work with at all the retail suppliers to understand their impact? Because my current commodity, is it already reflecting these new charges? Or will it depend on really how the retail supplier is procuring, where is procuring its commodity?
It's the latter, as well as your contract with the retail supplier, because they're bound by that contract and the rates in it, and it may depend on whether there's a provision that would allow them to change the rate to cover something like this in that contract. As far as staff's contact with the retail suppliers, I personally spoke to Mr. Green early on in this process to give them at least a heads up that this was happening and that this might have an effect on them, and to just suggest that they pay attention and be involved. But they really didn't take us up on that offer, so there really hasn't been further contact or discussion with them. Nonetheless, we did feel it important that we examine the potential impacts on suppliers and try and mitigate those impacts.
Okay, so this has already been brought up. The retail suppliers haven't really engaged actively in this, and so we don't really know of any real harms or
We don't know of any definite effects. That would be correct,
Okay,
Commissioner.
and this is going to be a flat charge. Is that correct? It's not a flat charge. It is volumetric, or how is it levied?
For the PCA?
Yeah.
My understanding is the PCA is a kilowatt hours charge, and so if you use more, you'll pay more.
Okay, so it will be reflective
Right,
of
and then also the way it's paid out and the way it was put in. My understanding is it's a pyramid. So basically, in July it will peak, and that you'll be at what I would assume this $8 charge for the average residential customer, and then as it's paid down over time, it will taper off down to the bill impacts without these charges included on the customer.
Okay, but it'll be reflected in the volumetric usage. Okay, is that the same methodology that the utilities are proposing? Or I guess I could ask the utility. Is it volumetric, or will it just be a flat one-time charge to pay for these transmission costs?
We're not proposing to change it from a volumetric charge, Your Honor.
You're
That's
not?
what
Okay.
you're asking.
Okay, it currently is a volumetric.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. That's all questions.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Well, obviously, this is a difficult case with OPC advocating concerns with respect to residential ratepayers, the utility indifferent to either proposal, and staff demonstrating its concerns and the cost shifts that we would have amongst various rate classes over a one-year period versus a two-year period. Like I said at the outset, I wish we weren't in this position and the allocation methodology was resolved over 10 years ago, but these chickens have come home to roost. I am persuaded by Mr. Baker's analysis and a review of the tables regarding the cost shifts that would happen to affect not only the residential ratepayers, but all these various classes of service in various ways. In addition to the effects on the retail suppliers, which is not my primary concern since they didn't directly participate in this matter, but there would be some, obviously, effects on their ability to do business when these rates are ultimately collected by their customers. So with that said, I do support staff's recommendation for both the Delmarva and the Pepco case. Obviously, the Pepco case is a little more concerning because of the cost implications. Commissioner Richard.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think after hearing from the parties, I will also go along with the staff recommendation for the reasons that you cited.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Ditto, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Linton.
Thank you. I agree with all of you so far.
Thank you. Commissioner Herman.
It would be my recommendation to accept the OPC proposal. I'm unconvinced, that this is, I understand the allocation issues, but I am unconvinced that, we should be doing this, at least if for retail suppliers, if they're interested in these issues, and it sounds like you even tried to get them interested in these issues, and they are not. I would have spread it over the longer period of time. It would reduce the impact on residential customers and without any carrying charges. So that would be my vote.
Thank you, Commissioner Herman. Obviously, two very compelling positions here. With that said, is there a motion for both items? I think both could be done at once.
Okay, for 7 and 8. Okay, let me look at this real quick. All right, for items number 7 and 8, I move we direct the companies to incorporate the rates as presented by staff in its comments dated April 10 to 29 into the both companies' SOS riders. Okay. Okay. Direct the company to reverse the transmission charges placed into the procurement cost adjustment since August 2018, and direct the companies to file clean copies of its revised SOS risers with an effective date of June 1st, 2019.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed?
The motions carry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving to item number 9, which we've already looked at in a way. Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative, Inc., filed on November 30th, 2018, revised tariff pages. The company proposes to adjust its base standard offer service rates in accordance with the approved settlement in case number 8985.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. David Hoppick on behalf of staff. Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative, or SMECO, has filed revised base standard offer service rates by commission order under a settlement agreement. SMECO is required to submit revised base SOS rates when the residential class power purchase cost adjustment exceeds 5% of the class's base SOS rate on an absolute value basis for 3 consecutive months, which occurred at the end of 2018. This filing is largely driven by an increase in transmission costs, and the primary driver of the increase in the transmission costs is FERC acceptance of the PJM settlement agreement regarding allocation and cost recovery of high voltage transmission. So this increase in transmission costs causes base SOS demand charges to increase significantly for some large customer classes. In its filing, SMECO has proposed a 25% cap on any change in rates. Staff opposes this 25% cap because staff believes it is inconsistent with the settlement agreement governing base SOS rates, and because staff believes the cap creates an advantage for SOS rates over retail supply, and because SOS rates should reflect market rates. Additionally, staff proposes to allocate part of the PJM transmission settlement, which reallocates transmission revenue already collected from customers from 2007 to 2015 based on transmission revenue billed to these customer classes from 2007 to 2015 because this is the time period in which the PJM settlement states that SMECO customers underpaid for high voltage transmission. Staff's proposed allocation has a minor impact on residential winter standard offer service rates and no impact on residential summer standard offer service rates. The change in bill impact for the average residential customer during the winter months is approximately 12 cents more per month with staff's allocation method. Staff recommends that the Commission accept the revised base SOS rates as revised by staff and directs SMECO to use staff's adjusted cost allocation for the reallocated 2007 to 2015 transmission revenue in its power purchase cost adjustment with an effective date of June 1st, 2019. Staff has spoken with SMECO and it is our understanding that SMECO is able to make this change in their PPCA. I would note that staff's buck sheet says an effective date of May 1st, but because this was deferred, we are requesting June 1st, which it is our understanding SMECO has agreed with. Thank you.
Thank you. Council for SMECO.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Mark McDougall on behalf of SMECO. The first thing I'd like to do is compliment staff, and particularly Mr. Hoppick, for this, very, very good analysis. This is a complicated issue, and I thought staff did a particularly good job in their buck sheet. Mr. Hoppick is correct. SMECO is in accord with staff's comments. We are willing and we're willing to implement our base SOS rates and the PPCA exactly as staff has recommended in its buck sheet.
Thank you. Do commissioners have questions? Seeing none for this item, is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the proposed base standard offer service rates as revised by staff in its comments dated April 11th, 2019, and directs SMECO to use staff's adjusted cost allocation in setting its purchase power cost adjustment, and directs SMECO to file clean copies of its tariff with an effective date of June 1st, 2019.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? The motion carries. Thank you.
Item number 10 is Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative, Inc., filed on April 26, 2019, revised tariff pages, the proposed tariff revisions, update rider USP.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Annette Garofalo on behalf of Commission staff. By order number 89105, the Commission adopted staff's proposal that current EUSP surcharges be reduced for both residential and non-residential customers, and directed that Maryland Electric Companies file revised tariffs reflecting a reduced EUSP surcharge rate of 32 cents per month for residential customers and a reduction of 30.64% for each of the 24 non-residential EUSP surcharge tiers, which are also billed monthly. Staff has reviewed, SMECO has filed a revised rider USP to its tariff in compliance with Commission Order Number 89105. Staff has reviewed the revised tariff and confirmed that SMECO has revised its electric service program monthly surcharge for residential and non-residential customers consistent with the Commission's order. Staff recommends the Commission accept the revised tariff pages for filing with an effective date of May 1, 2019.
Thank you. Counsel for SMECO.
Your Honor, I'm just here to answer any questions.
Thank you. Does the bench have any questions?
Do we need to change this effective date since we're past May 1?
Commissioner Herman, SMECO has implemented its new EUSP charges effective May 1, so
Okay.
customers are already being billed under that
May
rate.
1.
So we continue to request the May 1 effective date.
Okay, thank you.
And I will just note parenthetically, I noticed the drop in my bill.
You're welcome, Commissioner.
Is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move we accept the revised tariff pages for filing with an effective date of May 1st, 2019, and grant the requested waiver of the 30-day notice period required by Public Utilities Article 4-203A.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The last item on the agenda as item number 12 has been removed pursuant to the applicant's request. So item 11 is the Potomac Edison Company filed on April 16, 2019, a request for a waiver concerning 2 major storms.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Peter Wilson on behalf of the staff. Comar 2050-0105 authorizes the Commission to waive a regulation contained in Subtitle 50 for good cause. For 2 storms in February of this year, Potomac Edison requests waiver of the Comar definition of major outage event, requiring storms to impact greater than 10% of a utility's customers in order to qualify. The purpose of the waivers would be to allow Potomac Edison to treat Winter Storm Maya and Windstorm Kiana as major outage events and exclude the outage data from these storms in calculating its 2019 SAIDI and SAIFI results. Potomac Edison suggests good cause exists to grant these waivers for 3 reasons. Staff has reviewed these reasons and disagrees. The first is both storms came close to meeting the 10% requirement under the current standards for defining a major outage event, but fell short to meet that definition. The storms did meet the requirements under the IEEE 2.5 beta method, which will take effect next year. Potomac Edison states that inclusion of outage data from these storms will result in its failure to achieve its SAIDI and SAIFI goals for 2019 and trigger the requirement to produce a corrective action plan. Staff notes that the Commission has maintained a bright line in the definition of a major outage event and calculation of SAIDI and SAIFI numbers. In the past, when other companies have come close to meeting that definition, a corrective action plan was still submitted when SAIDI and SAIFI goals were not met as a result. Staff fears that the erosion of that mandatory threshold by waiver grants will result in a spate of filings for waivers for these storms and whenever goals are approached but not met, not only under the current definition, but after next year's new method as well when it is implemented. The second reason Potomac Edison suggests the formulation of a corrective action plan would be a waste of time and resources because the storms were unavoidable. Although conceding that there were lessons learned from these storms, Potomac Edison suggests that it would be an, quote, inefficient and ineffectual, end quote, use of resources to formulate a corrective action plan as required. Staff notes that such an argument could always be raised when a company fails to meet its SAIDI and SAIFI goals, but that the Commission has found that addressing shortfalls in a corrective action plan to be useful and productive. The third reason Potomac Edison suggests that the inevitable failure to meet SAIDI and SAIFI goals resulting from these storms early in the year will leave its employees without the bonus incentive based on meeting these goals. Staff does not believe that employee productivity problems Potomac Edison may have amounts to good cause to alter the Commission's regulations. The continued productivity of its employees is entirely within the control of Potomac Edison's management. For these reasons and the reasons contained in its written comments, staff recommends that the Commission deny the company's waiver request concerning Winter Storm Maya and Winter Storm Kiana.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Counsel for Potomac Edison.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Jeffrey Trout. I'm counsel to the Potomac Edison Company, as you know. I respectfully disagree with staff's analysis. I have 6 reasons why I disagree with staff's analysis. If you will permit, I'm going to list the 6 reasons, and then I will explain each one in a little more detail. The 6 reasons are: number 1, this is a case of first impression, as staff's filing itself demonstrates. Number 2, the Commission precedent which sets the policy which I respectfully suggest should guide the Commission's exercise of its discretion on this issue is Order Number 89056, the Commission's ruling on March 6th of this year that the IEEE 2.5 beta method is the better way of determining SAIDI and SAFE compliance, and the Commission's decision to apply that standard going forward. The third reason why I disagree with staff's analysis is that the company performed during these storms, as staff itself acknowledged, appropriately, and the company met the standards of performance for a major outage event. This distinguishes the company's situation from that of some or all of the other instances that are discussed in staff's comments. The fourth reason that I disagree with staff is that the staff itself treated these two storms as major outage events. The fifth reason for disagreement is that given the rule change in particular, given the Commission's order in Order Number 89056 changing to the IEEE 2.5 beta methodology, it is particularly futile to ask the company to file next year a corrective action plan to meet a standard that we met this year. And finally, with respect to the sixth point, with respect to staff's recommendation concerning the impact on employee incentives for the balance of 2019, I respectfully suggest that staff's position on that issue is internally inconsistent. To go back and discuss the 6 points in more detail. As staff, number one, case of first impression. As staff itself acknowledges in its recitation of prior instances where companies have suffered substantial storms that fell short of a major outage event, in each of the cases that staff refers to, the company did not do what Potomac Edison has done here. The company did not come in and ask for a waiver. Therefore, there is no precedent. The Commission has never denied a waiver in these circumstances. The Commission has also never granted a waiver in these circumstances. It is, by definition, an issue of first impression. The Commission is free to exercise its discretion. And for the other reasons that I will discuss this morning and that are discussed in our written filing, I respectfully recommend that you exercise it in favor of granting the waiver. If there are no questions about that point, I'll move to the second. In March of this year, shortly after the second of these two storms occurred, the Commission made a substantial change to the RM43 set of rules. The Commission held that the IEEE 2.5 beta method is the better way of determining when a storm is of the magnitude such that it should be excluded from the SAIDI and SAFE calculations. On page 5 of our written comments, I quoted at length from pages 9 and 10 of the Commission's March 6th order. Looking back at that just very briefly, the Commission pointed out that the 2.5 beta method is industry best practice. It's an effective means of normalizing reliability data. It reduces variation from year to year. It accounts for high impact but short duration events, which the MOE definition, the old definition, does not. It avoids problems that staff had acknowledged with the MOE definition. And finally, it should have an impact on cost of reducing costs. All of these are findings of the Commission on a major policy issue that you've made within the last several months, and that I respectfully submit point you to applying that new standard to these circumstances.
But Mr. Trout, you
Yes.
do recognize that those standards do not take effect until January 1st.
Absolutely, Your Honor, and that's why we're asking for the waiver. The third point is about the company's performance. Now, staff, in their comments, very graciously acknowledged the appropriateness of the company's performance in responding to these two storms. And we thank the staff for that, and we agree with staff on that point. In particular, as discussed in detail in our written comments, we met all the requirements that the company would have had imposed on it if these two storms had been just slightly more severe, and they had in fact been major outage events. They hadn't been just major event days, but they had actually met the old COMAR definition of major outage events. We restored customers in time. We responded to downed wires in time. We met all of the standards that the Commission imposes in a major outage event. And I would suggest to you that that circumstance is potentially different from the other cases that staff referred to, in at least one of the cases that staff referred to in their buck sheet of an almost but not quite major outage event, where a company then failed the reliability standards. Staff pointed out that it did not believe that the company's response to that storm was appropriate, and staff did not present evidence in their comments that any of the other instances they point to, the company met the major outage event performance requirements. Here, Potomac Edison did. Potomac Edison treated these two storms as though they were major outage events, and we met the standards for those. So that's my third point. Moving on to the fourth point, which was staff's treatment of these storms. Staff called the company in to give detailed briefings on these two storms. The staff then provided to the Commission all the materials that we provided to staff. Staff asked us a series of data requests with respect to these two storms, which we responded to in full, and staff asked us to give them all of the data that we would have had to provide in a major outage event report. So for purposes of reporting and accountability, staff treated these two storms as major outage events. But now they say that for purposes of performance, they shouldn't be treated as major outage events, and I suggest that's inconsistent. Fifth, corrective action plan. When the Commission, in the past, when storms caused companies to fail the SAIDI or SAFE standards, and the rules in the following year for SAIDI and SAIDI compliance were going to be the same as the rules in the year where they flunked, it may indeed have made sense to require the company to file a corrective action plan. But now, in this unique situation where the storms occurred in the last year where the old rules would apply, and next year the new rules would apply, and if these storms had occurred in 2020, they would have been excluded and we would not be failing the standards, or at least assuming the rest of our performance for the year was adequate, we would not be failing the standards. The corrective action plan basically is for us to do the same appropriate storm response as we did to these two storms, because we would have passed the standard that would have been prevailing then. Because the rules are changing, because our performance met the rules that would apply next year, the corrective action plan we would be filing next year would in effect be do what we did because next year that would have been a pass. So I think in these unique circumstances, this is an appropriate situation to avoid the waste of time and resources of putting together a corrective action plan. The company is not arguing that prior instances where corrective action plans were submitted were inappropriate. The company is not arguing that in the future, when people fail the future standards, that they shouldn't file corrective action plans. All the company is saying is that on this cusp year, it doesn't make sense for the commission to force the company to file a plan next year that in effect says, do what we did because it would be a pass now.
So, Mr. Trout,
Yes.
what if the rules were changing 2 years from now? Would you make this same argument?
I would have a much more, in my mind at least, a much more difficult argument to make.
How about 18 months?
That would be closer.
Right. The fact is we have rules that are in effect, and those
Right.
rules are in effect, and we're going to have new rules.
Right.
And is it not true that if the company were required to file a CAD within the time frame, it could say just what you said, and you have a PowerPoint that does much of what's in there. And is it not true that the company could then make the arguments that you're making without having to waive the requirements of an existing rule because a new rule is coming?
Your Honor is correct with respect to the corrective action plan portion of our request for relief, that we could, in effect, next year, file a plan that basically says we actually responded appropriately to the storms, and that would be a pass this year. So our corrective action plan is to continue to do in the future what we did in these two storms. It doesn't address the question of actually failing the standards. It just addresses the question of what the remedy would be.
And I agree with that. And is it not also true that in the past there have been companies, and I believe Potomac Edison and potentially at one point, not having passed the standard, and then the companies provide an explanation for why they didn't pass the standard? And are you aware of any repercussions, financial repercussions on these companies if they failed to meet the standard and provided a reasonable explanation as to why?
I'm not sure. If I'm understanding your question correctly with respect to financial repercussions.
They haven't been fined.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, no, you are correct that in the well, I'm going to speak to Potomac Edison's experience because that's what I'm most familiar with. There have been a handful of instances over the past years where we have failed one or more standards. Generally, we either meet all the standards or we miss one. I think there may have been 1 year where we missed two, but we have never been fined. We have always been able to explain what happened, and we have always been able to provide the Commission with a corrective action plan which the Commission and staff deemed to be appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
All right. The final point, the sixth point, was about the incentive to employee performance. And staff is both right and wrong on this point. They are correct in their belief that First Energy could allow Potomac Edison to the employees of Potomac Edison nonetheless to receive some incentive if even though the company failed to meet the safety and safety requirements for 2019. But the staff is wrong in implying or seeming to imply, and I don't want to put words into their mouth, but as I read the staff comments, they seem to be implying that that it's a foregone conclusion, and the company just has to say, oh, that's how it's going to be. Potomac Edison would have to ask First Energy to vary a First Energy-wide policy. And the first question that First Energy Management would ask, well, are these exceptional circumstances? Did you go to the commission and try to explain to the commission that these were exceptional circumstances? And our response would have to be, yes, we did. And the commission staff said, no, they're not exceptional circumstances, and the normal rules should apply. And presumably, and then if the commission accepts staff recommendation, I would further have to tell management of First Energy, and the commission agreed with staff that these are not exceptional circumstances and the normal rules apply. So it's very difficult to imagine circumstances where we would succeed in persuading First Energy's management to make an exception when the commission has considered whether an exception should be made and declined to do so. So those are the 6 reasons why, respectfully, I disagree with staff, and I believe for the reasons articulated in our original motion, the waiver should be granted.
Thank you, Mr. Trout. Why don't we hear from Office of People's Counsel, and then we'll have some questions.
Good morning. Jacob Auslander on behalf of the Maryland Office of People's Counsel. The OPC agrees with staff and opposes Potomac Edison's waiver request. We agree that with staff that granting a waiver would be unprecedented, and I think from OPC's perspective would lead to an undermining of the mandatory nature of the RM43 standards. I would note that these safety and safety standards have been used as justification for massive spending on behalf of utilities that are reflected in the rates that ratepayers pay. And it would certainly be inappropriate from our perspective if the mandatory nature of those requirements were waived when a storm that did not quite meet the level of a major outage event was nonetheless considered a major outage event for the purposes of establishing the performance under SAIDI and SAFE. And I would note that even though the standard will change next year, what will not change is the fact that there will be situations where storms or weather activity or other events don't quite meet the threshold for a major outage event. So it's important that the company be prepared to increase the speed of the restoration times and do everything that they can do to make sure that outages occur as infrequently as possible and as for as short a duration as possible. And for that reason, OPC thinks that a corrective action plan is warranted.
Thank you, Mr. Auslander. Questions from the bench, if we have more. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Trout, I wanted to ask you, remind me, I don't remember, in our March 2019 order specifying going to a 2.5 beta methodology effective January 1st of next year, did we require the utilities to report their reliability performance data under both methodologies?
Yes.
I thought so. And so you quote the 4 bullets on page 5 of your filing extolling the virtues of the beta 2.5 methodology, and I think we made a sound decision, but would you acknowledge that the commission also wanted to have a comparison between the two methodologies, and that's why we required you to report under both methodologies so we could have a transitional comparison data point?
Yes, I completely agree with you, Commissioner, and I would go one step further and say that the Commission's decision there was very sound because all of the prior data that the Commission would be dealing with is going to be data that was produced by the major outage event standard. The data that the Commission would be looking at going forward will be data based on the major event day, the IEEE 2.5 beta methodology, and having that period of time when you've got both sets of data side by side enables the Commission to look back at years like 2017, 2016, 2015, and make comparisons. So the Commission's decision there was very, very sound.
Of course, as we often are. So why would I want, as a commissioner, to order in March, give me both sets of numbers, and then add for PE this kind of skewing of the numbers by early implementation of a 2.5 beta perturbation in the MOE data that I would otherwise get?
I see your concern, and the company would have no reservations about the Commission conditioning the grant of the waiver on, for example, us reporting to the Commission our major outage event-based data, both with and without the waiver included.
Yeah, but
so you would have you would have exactly the same
that's
data.
not my question, though. My question is, why would I want to skew the data in the first place? I'm not doing it for any other utility, and I'd have to ask Potomac Electric to report both sets of data and take that into account and go in this long machination of comparison. It's going to be difficult enough to compare the two methodologies. Why would I want to? I mean, you cite going to the new methodology going forward as the reason we should look back and let this in. You do it extensively. You don't say that we're going to report both sets of data. I'm just failing to see why we should do this and now based on what the standard will be in the future.
I believe, subject to check, that our company is the only company, the only electric company in Maryland whose performance data was substantially impacted by these two storms. So our company would be the only company, well, certainly our company is the only company that's come to you and asked for a waiver, but our company is the only company where you would have potentially this data issue, Commissioner, and I think if you asked us, or if you conditioned your grant of the waiver on us providing you the data in such a way as to solve that problem, the problem would be solved. You would have all the data that you needed, and we could do that.
I know you could. I'm just not sure that it's necessary or is a justification for granting these waivers. I wanted to ask you about employee incentives. You seem to be arguing that we should somehow base our decision on whether or not you can make a successful argument to your parent company for a waiver. Why should we consider that at all?
No, my point there was to disagree with staff's projection of what will happen were the Commission to deny the waiver. I believe on the issue of employee incentives that the reason the Commission should consider that in granting the waiver is because the employees otherwise are looking at a situation where they're not going to make it. No matter what they do, they could keep every light on, every line up, under any possible circumstance for the entire rest of the year, and they're still not going to make it. And I respectfully submit that sends the wrong message to our employees, and that is why the Commission should consider that factor in granting the waiver.
That sounds like an argument you should make to your management, your parent company, not to this Commission.
Then, and that's when we get to my sixth point in response to staff, which is if you have considered the matter and said, regardless of how it incents employees, we don't think these are exceptional circumstances. We don't think the company's performance warranted a waiver in these circumstances, despite the fact that the company met the major outage event requirements. If you hold that, why should First Energy's management reach a different
Yeah,
conclusion.
but we're not deciding on the incentive package. We didn't negotiate the incentive package. We didn't have any part of its formulation or its implementation. We have no role in that, and yet it seems to me like you're suggesting we do because it makes your argument harder with your own management.
It is correct that you did not set up the incentives. We got, as the commissioner will recall, we got into a discussion of what are and are not appropriate incentives in our most recently concluded rate case. The commission concluded that the incentives based on service reliability standards are appropriate and should be funded in rates. And so to that, they're not standards that you have, that you set, but they are standards that you approved as appropriate.
One last question. Are you suggesting that the company's performance will intentionally decline because of the lack of an incentive for your employees should your parent company not grant a waiver?
No, I would hope that our employees will still continue to do the best they can in all circumstances. I will tell you, though, Commissioner, and this strays beyond oral advocacy as an attorney and is becoming anecdotal, but I will share it with you nonetheless. I have been approached about this waiver request by all sorts of people in our field and back office operations here in Maryland, people who I've never dealt with before, people who, frankly, I had no idea that they knew who I was. And they've asked me, has this been submitted? How's it going? What are the prospects for it? There's a lot of interest among our employees as to whether this is going to be granted or not. Interest that, a level of interest I've not seen before from rank and file people.
I appreciate the anecdote. As a former employee of a public utility in Maryland who worked under a system of results incentives awards, I appreciate that. Certainly, it's an important component of compensation, and I get that. But that's not not a primary concern of mine. Of course, we have to be cognizant of it, but in this matter, I will just say that I appreciate your argument with regard to a case in first impression, because it does set a precedent for the remainder of the hurricane season and the beginning of winter. So this may not be the first time we address this based on the decision we make here today, but thank you for that.
Mr. Trout, thank you for those 6 arguments. They were compelling, but I am not inclined to grant the waiver today. These objective metrics and factors are somewhat unforgiving, and I recognize that we are on the cusp of changing our policy going into next year. But the fact if Potomac Edison was at 9.9% versus 10, whether it qualifies for MOE becomes a slippery slope, not only for our current COMAR regulations, but for the IEEE standards that we're moving to going in the future. That said, with respect to the cap, I do believe that the utility should still file a cap for next year, but I recognize it is somewhat backwards. If you're filing a cap in 2020 for an event in 2019 and it's a different set of regulations. I did review the 70 some odd slides that were presented here. I see lessons learned. I seen actions that were taken. The staff and linemen performed admirably over the course of these few weeks, working in a territory that has a challenging topography. I would say that if your staff is spending more than probably 8 hours in putting together a cap, it's probably too much time, but I see a lot of good work here, so it's not like the utility would have to reinvent the wheel when it came time to file its cap. But that's my position. Do other commissioners wish to share any thoughts?
Yeah, I would support that position as well. I think this was a very compelling presentation today, but again, I really come down on the importance of the integrity of the metrics and the calculations of those metrics that I think the OPC brought up today. We have to, you've got your FE board, but we have our board in Annapolis, the legislature, and former governor RM43 came out of extreme weather and some of the performances, and that's why we have these metrics that we need to hold up and make sure our utilities meet. So I think it's very important that again we make sure we're doing our job here. I tend to agree also that even though this is a cusp year, but again I think that it's important we live by the rules we have now. I was also very impressed with the filing. We have a hard copy right here I'm looking at, and to me that came across as almost a draft cap in itself. So I think you're well on your way, and I think a lot of the conclusions are there. I think that was really all I had. Yeah, I think that I think we're corrected probably to pass on the waiver today.
Commissioner Herman.
I agree. I would not grant the waiver, but I understand and acknowledge, Mr. Trout, your concern with respect to employee incentive plans. First, I would say that all of the utility employees that I have met throughout my extended tenure in this industry, they always work as hard as they can to restore in terrible conditions. And I think, I'll speak for myself, and I suspect all the other commissioners, that we appreciate all that they do, and that they, and I know that they will work hard regardless of their compensation plan, because that's what they do and that's what they've committed to do. To the extent you want to some assistance with your management, I would give you, I would urge the management to consider that as well with respect to their employee compensation plans. It's not our job to compensate your employees, and I think in rate cases, we frequently, the commission allows for wage increases and all of that, and acknowledges that that's important for employees. So I think that, that I hope that your management will in fact consider the situation in which it finds itself.
I'm going to make some comments. I wasn't going to, but first of all, let me thank Mr. Trout for representing his company very well. You've made very compelling arguments. I would agree. Not enough to change my mind, but I always enjoy the back and forth that you provide to this commission and the information that you give us. So thank you for that. I agree. I think when results incentive awards or incentive packages are negotiated, developed by the management team of a company, if the company wants to build in the appropriate flexibility on those four exceptions, I think that's where it should be done, and that's where it should be developed, and it shouldn't be the reason for me to make a decision based on the public interest, not necessarily a special interest. And so that's why I am not, although I am sympathetic to the impact on the employees, I am. Trust me, I've lost significant incentive awards based on a hard pass or fail. So I understand the concept and the impact that has, but I am not willing to compromise my decision in the public interest for those purposes. And so, yes, I think maybe your corporate parents should look at this very, very closely, but that's not a reason for me to decide in that direction. So I will be voting to deny the company's waiver request.
Commissioner, could I respectfully request that assuming I've seen 4 out of 5 votes so far, so I think I know how this is coming out. Assuming
very stupid.
I learned to count to 5 a long time ago. Assuming the commission's order is to deny the waiver, any language that the commission could include in its order of denial that would provide us with points that we could take to First Energy Management on the subjects that you and Commissioner Herman have touched on would be very helpful.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Trout. Is there a motion? Commissioner Linton, did you wish to reveal anything at this point?
Well, I'm the fourth or the fifth vote, or the fifth or the fifth vote, I guess. I actually would have granted the waiver. I know it doesn't matter because we already have 4 votes opposed, but and it's a slim vote for me. But I feel like we've already made clear to the industry that we're changing the standard, and although our regulations don't reflect it, we're already in the transition period, and so this is an issue that is going to be there at least for the next 7 or 8 months or so until we're operating under the new standard. I think the corrective action plan that the company will end up filing, as Mr. Trout already mentioned, isn't going to provide us with any additional information, and it's just going to be for administratively following the requirements of a regulation or a standard that we know we're changing, and we've already told the industry we're changing. I would have granted the waiver, and it is a close one for me. I understand that the employees there have worked very diligently and through very difficult conditions in order to maintain the service and to meet the standards during the time of the outage. And so, having worked on the outage team before, and as a lawyer, I didn't really do much, but it was still, I understand that the work is difficult and unforgiving. So for those kinds of reasons, I think that for my vote, I would have granted the waiver.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And actually, before I state the motion, I'd just like to add that I also want to say I want to be very supportive of your employees. I think they do an outstanding job, and again, I hope your company management will use its discretion when it makes its evaluations, because I don't think what we're doing today has any reflection whatsoever on the good work of your employees. So I think overall we can probably keep the motion pretty clean, but you'll have this YouTube video you can show them if it helps at all. That we certainly hope they'll look out for their good employees.
That'll be an interesting meeting.
Anyway, with that, for item number 11, I move we deny the company's waiver request concerning Winter Storm Maya and Winter Storm Kiana.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed.
The motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
This meeting is adjourned.